Allison, great to have you on the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to take chat and get into it.
Yeah, likewise. And I got a chance to check out, you on previous interviews, your LinkedIn, and you've got such a storied background. You've been in so many different places, and I'm guessing you've learned a ton. So with that, this is a big question, but can you talk about your background and kind of how you got to leading marketing at State Farm?
Yeah, sure. So I started on the agency side. I started, in college was a PR and communications major, and then got hired into a PR agency. So started those formidable years on the agency side. In fact, I always say if I really, really like a candidate, I usually say start at an agency first. I think that's the best training ground to open up young minds to different business models, different client cultures, different types of companies, big, small, when you get to work on all the varied clients. I think it's such a great training ground for, that early career starting and figuring out what you like yourself. So I feel fortunate that I was at two different agencies, a fairly small independent agency, and then a bigger that was in the Omnicom family agency. And starting in that storytelling and narrative was kind of where I my default function, if you will, goes back to that. And started in Silicon Valley. I was born and raised there. My mom was a 43-year retiree from Hewlett Packard. So I only say that to say that Silicon Valley and tech was where I was at and what was buzzing all around, especially in the early 90s when I got out of college and started my career there in that tech industry on the agency side.
That's great. And I think in one of your previous interviews, you talked about starting kind of pursuing pharmacy or pursuing that path. And then in college, you described kind of going into an advertising class. You said, these are my people.
Yes.
What is it about marketers, advertisers that you think is compelling or interesting?
You know, I'm careful when I answer it because it's not that pharmacy students aren't my people necessarily. I loved pharmacy. I wanted to be a pharmacist, but I had been working from the age of 15 and a half through my junior year of college, actually in pharmacy and filling prescriptions and stuff. And there was such a different vibe when I walked into that first marketing and advertising class, and influence and the ability to use copy and images and emotion to get a point across. I don't know. I had been so into organic chemistry and calculus and these sort of science things, which I love, but it spoke to me when I realized there was this industry out there. I mean, of course, I knew there was an industry out there, but it hadn't been in the forefront of my thought process that it could be for me until I walked into that class. And it was so different than anything of the 3 years that preceded it of my college education. And I just loved the vibe and the feeling of what those students were interested in the chatter and what we talked about in study groups and things. It was just very compelling to me at the time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so you're kind of getting out of college, joining an agency. And what was it like working in an agency in the 90s? And yeah, how did that experience play out for you?
Oh my gosh, Silicon Valley was booming at that time, and I was in the thick of it.
Yeah.
And I was on the agency side. So like I have already alluded to, I was on several different clients. So I remember I was on a team that took a client public. I was on a team that slowed down a business unit, sort of jettisoned a business unit, right? So I was getting experiences of all these different types of things that a company would go through that, man, if you were just at that one company, you may or may never experience one of those things. But on the agency side with several clients and being especially young in your career, you're kind of on a lot of clients, when you're more that junior support staff. And I was just getting exposure to a lot of different things, all technology companies, but all, that explosion of new businesses and startups and the culture. And just like I said, taking companies public, venture capitalists looking to get a PR agency on the docket, so that they could then go public. There just all that vibe was going on in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was in the thick of it and experiencing so many different challenges. And that's why I've always said to younger, early career folks, think about starting on the agency side. There's creative agencies, there's PR agencies, there's experiential agencies, there's market research agencies, right? There's a ton of different, depending on if you're left brain, right brain, somewhere in between like me. And that just that exposure to all the dynamism that you get early on, I think then helps kind of, I don't like this, I do like that, I want this, I don't want that. And it helped me make the selection when I decided to cross over from the agency side into client side. I really knew what I wanted and that it was going to be the right kind of step for me based on the broad exposure that I had.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I kind of have two questions in one. I guess first is what made you decide to leave the agency space and go brand side? And then how does that reflect the sorts of applicants you're interviewing now in marketing roles at State Farm? Is that typical? People are coming from
Yeah.
the agency world, or where, if not, then where are the better applicants generally coming from these days?
Yeah. So for me, I was ready to take that step. Oh gosh, now I should know the calculations. I don't know, 7 years or something on the agency side. And I had been on the Hewlett Packard HP account, and I was the acting PR manager for the computer division at HP. And then they hired me in. So the it wasn't a very big stretch or scary move because I was sort of that acting person anyway for a long time. And then there was that weird coincidence that my mom had been at HP for her entire career. So in the 70s, I grew up going to HP company barbecues.
Yeah.
I have said in podcasts in the past that literally Bill and Dave, Hewlett and Packard were flipping burgers at those company barbecues in the Santa Cruz Mountains,
Yeah.
Little Basin, for those who know the area,
Mhm.
and literally patted me on my head in the early 70s. So there was something about HP that felt comfortable and easy to take that step. But I took the step away from the agency side because I knew I was ready to grow beyond just the function of PR. It's still my heart and I love it, but I was ready to I was ready to go in and start taking on more and more and more on the client side, a broader swath of marketing. So, internal communications, external communication, executive communications is kind of how it started. And then you add measurement and advertising and creative. And, now head of marketing at State Farm is great. I get the opportunity to manage all of it. But, it just started on the agency side narrowly, and then by going into HP, I was able to expand that breadth.
Right. And get all sorts of experiences with all sorts of different clients and then kind of focus all that energy on one. Makes a lot of sense. And the second part of the question, yeah, how does that reflect the usual path for candidates now?
Thank you for
Yeah, no worries. I
bringing me
probably should
back to
have
that.
divided them up anyway. It's two big questions.
Yeah, I do think that agencies are a wonderful training ground, and I don't mean that to belittle, like say they're training. I mean these are sophisticated, big operations that are doing amazing work for the biggest brands in the world. But what I mean is they seem to be better set up than a smaller internal department that doesn't have all of. I just remember, Goldhorn training was what they called it. Goldhorn was the Wilson McHenry mascot in my first agency. And, there's training sessions and brown bag lunches and, all of these kinds of things. Also, I like to say there's different um, promotion opportunities, a junior associate, an associate, a senior associate, a junior manager, a senior manager, right? So there's a sense of progression. And to me, getting that opportunity and that experience helps for the client side brands to then say, all right, somebody has spent a little time, has had exposure to several different business models and all those different kinds of um, activities that happen in the life of a company. And they've learned a lot about teaming and collaboration, and they've learned the frustrations of the client, right? When
Yeah.
you're on the agency side, Believe me, I know how frustrating a client can be. And it's really cool because when you bring then in somebody from the agency, they understand both. And I think they treat agencies differently. They understand, look, they're meant to bill hours. The agency is meant to push and bring an outside perspective. They know what an agency thinks and how they think. So then when they're on the client side, I think they can take that experience that they're having with their agency partner and understand it instead of be frustrating by it,
Yeah.
right? So I do admit that I am excited about those candidates that come from an agency, but of course, there are an amazing group of candidates that come from small companies that have exposure across, they do everything inside the company. They are the marketing department, if you will. That's appealing. And then companies who come from really big global brands who have experience in other countries and other regions of the world, and the differences about how you think as a marketer, even if you're only marketing in the United States, having that experience of understanding the difference of marketing in China versus Argentina versus Canada is really beneficial. So you can get all of the amazing experiences no matter what the feeder is. But I do really appreciate the care and attention that agencies have for growing new talent.
Yeah, and I think that that's a lot like, we had Rory Sutherland on the show a while back from Ogilvy, and that was one thing that sticks out to me is he was like, it's always a ladder for misfits. For it's always like the sort of place that can take somebody else that wouldn't fit in a marketing role that will require an MBA or something like that, and it's a way to kind of get involved. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And to go back to HP, which is super interesting. So I think you started working there in 2000, right? And then you were there, I think, for like 16 years. What was it like to be there back then with the internet in infancy and like versus like what happened in those 16 years, I guess, which is a huge question, but
Oh my gosh. And I say this with all love to Hewlett Packard that shaped who I am as a marketer, shaped me with my family, with my mom being a 43-year retiree from the company. But a lot went down in that
yeah.
time that I was there. We had many CEOs, we had scandals, we had merger. Really, it was an acquisition of Compaq Computer. We were ahead of the game in certain areas. I remember Carly Fiorina when she was the CEO. I remember we had an iPac, and it was an early handheld. Came from the Compaq side of the acquisition house. But I remember one CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, she had a keynote, and she talked about how the iPac was, I can't remember, like the remote control for the living room and all of like a media server in your house and how you could manage streaming and services. And this was kind of like before any of that was even really happening. And so being in tech in Silicon Valley with these big companies that were global and were sometimes ahead of their game and just didn't kind of lead the transition, but sometimes really hitting the transition. Digital printing is one I'd say we really caught fire on the printing side of the house, photographs, and really being there to see all of those different variations of what Hewlett Packard was, and not the least of which was the splitting of the company into two, which it is today, Hewlett Packard Enterprise and HP Inc. And me having been on both, basically all sides of the business, it was really interesting to experience all the turbulence, but also the learning that it gave me.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And there's this great book you probably know. It's kind of become like one of those classic marketing books called Crossing the Chasm, right? Which is
Yes.
about marketing technology. We all know this. And it seems like you'd be on like if anybody's on the forefront of that problem of trying to get from early adopters to everybody else, it would be somebody leading marketing at HP and Intel for so many years. So I guess my question is, what do you have kind of like an undergirding marketing philosophy when it comes to marketing things that people don't accept yet? And what would that
Yes.
be? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny, and there's like a parallel with State Farm, weirdly. So I grew up in the tech industry where innovation and trying and failing, do something, just move, because I mean, on any given day, especially when I was at HP, some of the biggest global brands in the world had arrows at us. I mean, on any given day, the printer business had Kodak, Epson, Canon, etc. The PC business had Dell, IBM, Acer, etc. The services business, it's everything from BMC to consultants to whatever, right? So my point is we had to be fast because a competitor would do something before we would, holistically. And so I learned try, go, fail fast, regroup, try again. And I just didn't know any different because that's where I grew up, if you will. And so helping customers understand complex technology in the early days, like in the 90s when we were just talking about, it was easy. Speeds and feeds were all you needed to do. And I am also aging myself. I stood at a fax machine.
Mhm.
I'll have to look it up for those of you who don't know what that is. But I was feeding press releases into a fax machine, and all you had to do to get press in those early days would say, the battery life is, I don't know, 30 minutes probably at the time, not 16 hours like it is today. And the amount of memory and the speed and how long does it take to boot up, right? Those were the things that could get you press and set you apart. And then you fast forward and realize, look, customer benefits are what matter. And so, to the point of crossing the chasm, I learned early on that getting the technology in the hands of the user would be among the best ways for them to understand. So, if you'll indulge me, I'll tell a
Yeah,
short story.
please.
I was at HP and we were on the workstation side, which is like the really powerful but PCs, not server level, but a very powerful PC. And it was more like for the creative community, filmmakers, or anybody who needed big compute power, architects, the music industry, right? There were these where it could do better than, and at the time, Apple was the king of the creative agency, and it wasn't trying to be the most powerful computer. It could have if it wanted to. It wasn't. And these HP workstations were more powerful. And we were trying to get these workstations and HP's name in the hands of creatives and young people, consumers.
Yeah.
And so we went to Coachella, and we had at the time not just the powerful PCs, but two in one, computers that could come apart from each other, the keyboard, or flip all the way open, or touch screen, none of which was possible on an Apple. They just didn't have the technology at that time. And so we thought, well, let's set up like an experience, and these concert goers can take a break from the heat, come in and make stuff. But in order to make the giveaway that we were, sort of giving away, they had to interact in ways that they couldn't with an Apple computer. And it was really, really successful because there were people who are like, touch screen, I don't experience that in my data life, or a screen that flips, or it rotates, or it separates. And in order to make the giveaway, you had to do all those things. And I learned early on that that really resonates with people if you can connect their sight, sound, like all the senses, right? So I say that to say, fast forward into State Farm, and in November of 2020, we did a football activation during the football season, and we had an augmented reality game. You could get on your phone and hit logos, right? The State Farm logo that you see behind me there would be floating around wherever you were, and you hit them for prizes. But the point of it is, we don't have a technology that you can get your hands on as State Farm. It's an intangible, and it's something nobody
Yeah.
thinks about. Insurance, it's boring, right? But if we could spark dopamine and get into, oh my gosh, I'm winning, and we were giving away NFTs, and that was early, like NFTs were only 6 months in the world. So people were excited. And again, that notion of, even if your product isn't a product, but getting your brand in the hand of your intended target and helping them experience positive feelings from it or a benefit from it, I think really, really served me well and really shaped how I think about innovation and how I evaluate programs that agencies bring to us.
Yeah, that's great. And I definitely want to get to the agency angle because that's what all the listeners are chomping at the bit to hear probably. But that's it's really interesting. It reminded me, we did an interview with Jin Say, who was like former CMO of Levi's, and in my head, I was thinking like, whatever, Levi's are like part of the woodwork. Like they're here, they'll always be here. It's like in the same way the sun comes up, and that's that. And she corrected me, and she was like, no. Like the company, I don't know if she said it almost folded, but she said something to the effect of like we would have just become relegated to nothingness like many times if we didn't make XYZ work, and so on. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that because when I think of State Farm, I'm like, it's part of the woodwork. It's State Farm. They could just do nothing, or you could do things really well, and it'll always be there. What's your perspective on that, and how does that affect your job as a marketer?
Oh, so many brands have thought that. I am reminded of the time at HP, I kind of referenced it, of the printing photos. I remember Kodak, a 150-year-old brand. Whoever saw that coming, that they would just disappear? I mean, it's like at the time, no one was better at photography than Kodak, and they're just gone. And so any brand who believes that it has the power to just stay, will, I think, be gone one day. And so we are challenged because we're in a very competitive category. Insurance in general has it's really price sensitive. People shop based on price, and it's competitive, and some people value it, and some don't think about it at all. And so for us, we have to think every day about creating value, who we are, who do we, what do we stand for as a company? Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there, is relevant because we make it mean something in communities across the country. And our agents, we're almost 20,000 strong, independent contractor agents who are around the country serving our brand, and really serving the communities that they help, and help protect. And so for us, if we don't think about how do we not only secure business today, helping those agents capture the demand that's in the market today, that's my job, but my job is equally helping them set up for the future, and generating future demand is equally a marketer's job. And so that's why you see our brand in places like the gaming category, or music, or sports, or whatever, is so that we're not only relevant to, sort of a demographic today, but we're relevant in keeping our brand front and center for the younger audiences. And I think Jake from State Farm plays a big role in that too.
Yeah, that's interesting. And your background is compelling because you came from Silicon Valley, you're from California originally. So disruption is something that you're used to and that you know about. How does that affect your job as a marketer? Like what keeps you up at night in terms of like State Farm getting disrupted, if anything?
Yeah, a lot actually. So it was really important to me back in early 2020 when the metaverse was, a bigger conversation than it is today, and we can talk about that too. But our 100th anniversary was sort of coming up, and it was last year in 2022. And so in 2020, we were thinking about the metaverse. We are playing around. The avatar, the character Jake from State Farm had already been the first non-playable character in NBA 2K. So while that wasn't the metaverse, we had this sort of representation of our brand in a gaming environment, and we'd been learning a lot from it. But as we got closer and closer to our 100th anniversary, it was important to me that we were seen not as an old stodgy brand. So on that day in June, we launched our presence in the metaverse. And I'm sure it comes from my Silicon Valley disruption background. I'm sure that's why it just really mattered to me that we took that leap, and that we got into that space as a first mover for sure in our category. But even as a very early mover, even for the tech industry, and to meaningfully show up in ways. So we partnered with iHeart. We have State Farm Stadium, on Roblox and in Fortnite. We have State Farm Neighborhood as well. Jake is in the metaverse. So we have kind of like the equivalent of what we have in real life of stadium naming rights, as well as interacting with this avatar figure, Jake from State Farm, similar to what we were doing in NBA 2K. And so that we could authentically be there. This wasn't for the first time. We had already had learnings. We knew what to do and what not to do to make that experience for the interactions in the gaming or in the metaverse world authentic and meaningful to the people who were engaging with us. And it really mattered to me that we tried it. And I'm really, really proud of us for doing that. And similarly, we were thinking about, of course, AI and Chat GPT and Dolly, images and words and what does it mean for our industry. And so we're doing a lot behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, to just think about the new technologies, working with our agency partners to think about what do we need to bring to life to test and learn.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And with that in mind, can you talk about how you source agencies and just where you think they provide the most value, and also maybe how that's changed, right? Because you started an agency in the 90s, HP, other companies over the years, Intel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it's tough. Agencies are always in a tough spot because even if they have decades long experience with the brand, there are things they just don't have ready information about. The speed at which an enterprise's business could be taking turns in certain jurisdictions or things like that. An agency can try to be integrated, but it's only as integrated as the client allows. And to me, I've often said garbage in, garbage out. So if we're not getting the best out of your agency, likely the problem is you. And that is not something that people like to think about or hear or know. It's very easy to just say, ugh, they don't get it. And maybe sometimes that's true. Maybe there's not a fit. Maybe there's not a skill alignment for what the client needs. But probably 7 or 8 times out of 10, the client isn't enabling the right kind of engagement from the agency for them to perform at their best. So I always think the first thing that any brand should do when they're having trouble with an agency is to look critically at themselves. The problem is not a lot of people like to look critically at themselves and can sort of wish away or think away any truth and honesty there. And it's easier just to say, let's separate. So
Yeah.
I kind of say that. But what do I look for? There are some I've especially changing business units within HP. I also lived in Geneva, Switzerland for a year with HP. So I say that in the context of I was exposed to different agencies, even within the same company or in a different country with the same company. And so I have kept a couple with me that have kind of moved from job to job or company to company even. Um, and what I look for is, just there's that je ne sais quoi, right? That I don't know. The agency gets me. And for me, that's that we're going to push each other, that we're going to be innovative. I don't want to do what everyone else is doing. That is not exciting to me. And I don't want to do the things I've already done. I want to go do the next thing. And there are probably clients that aren't in that mindset, and I completely understand that. But for me, I don't want the same old, same old.
Yeah.
And looking at someone who can match my passion and energy for new and innovative, and taking a risk, calculated, of course, reasonable risk, is really, really important.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess like how has that affected the way that you engage agencies? Like, do you have like kind of like this this gang of companies or friends that will kind of you'll take with you and engage? Are you How often are you looking for new agencies doing new things? Are you hiring dozens or just a few over the course of your career in any given place? Like how are you kind of thinking about it?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate to be in some big brands in my career
Yeah.
and lots and lots and lots and lots of agencies. At HP globally, geez, I don't even know. I think at one time there was some obscene number like 190 or something. And then we did that classic procurement, let's get fewer, better, global support, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I've had the ability to have view to a lot. Those that come with me is less than 5. And I mean just a couple. And I've had success with them. But like here coming to State Farm, I've had new experiences with agencies I'd never honestly didn't even have awareness of in the past. And we've done some great things. The metaverse is a good example. The marketing arm is our partner, TMA, um, one of our partners at State Farm on the creative side. And TMA helped with that non-playable character in NBA 2K. TMA helps us with our sports football campaigns and our price campaigns. And TMA helped us with iHeart in the metaverse. And and they were new to me, and I just appreciate so much from them, and they're pushing me in new ways. But similarly, I have an agency who I've worked with for a very long time called Infinity Marketing Team, IMT, and they're on the experiential side. And they are grounded in that tech sector. And what I like about them is they're on the forefront of the craziest, latest, newest, weirdest, strangest in the best way
Yeah.
activations and how to imagine. I've often said about the president and CEO over there, Chad Tons, I can dream up a thing and then he makes it in real life happen. And when you can find a partner who truly understands the madness that is sometimes a crazy idea and then make it tangible in the real world, it's like, wow, that is a very good partnership. And there's somebody who, you know, has served me and the companies that I've been at very well over the years. So it's across the board.
Yeah, that's really insightful. I think a lot of people listening are gonna benefit from that. And I think one thing you said that's interesting is like, the idea of kind of pushing the envelope, coming up with new and unorthodox ideas, like taking risks is really important for an agency. But I think a lot of people listening are like, yeah, we do that, but then we just get shot down and it doesn't work. And it sounds like you're really into the risk taking and so on. But I think one thing that would be useful is like, can you give a little background, like when stuff like how does stuff get shot down? What's going on there, and how can agencies reset their expectations to deal with that?
You know, a couple there's it's in a couple of ways. So um sometimes agencies are just in the unfortunate position of their direct client or who the highest level of person that they can engage with truly isn't the ultimate decision maker. So sometimes, the bigger boss comes in and says no. And it's not always because the agency had a bad idea. There could be different factors. Like for instance, we this year, this Super Bowl, we opted not to do a proper television commercial. And we did have several proper, what you would think of as a Super Bowl television ad. We had a treatment, we had the ability to go do it. And then we kind of paused and looked at a couple of things. We looked at the uniqueness of the fact that we had happened to have stadium naming rights this year. State Farm Stadium is where the Super Bowl was being played. Number one, and our sector at large, not State Farm specifically, our sector at large was raising rates and part of inflation and cost of goods and services and claims and all of that going up. The industry was raising rates. And so we were like, optically, should we do a traditional Super Bowl ad? And what we did was decided to lean in to the naming rights. And we worked really closely with our agencies and said, well, what would it look like if we didn't do that traditional way? Because we kind of got to know, if you will. And so my point is that no turned into ultimately a much better opportunity for our brand. And it got us to all think creatively like, hey, we don't have to do this year a traditional ad in the same way because our name is going to be during the entire broadcast. We're there. The Super Bowl has come to us. And so what can we do differently? And it was born a campaign that we can talk about later if you'd like to. But the point there is sometimes a no is a blessing of an even better yes. So sometimes agencies get told no for one reason or another, macroeconomic
Yeah.
reasons, right? Not because the idea was bad. And then sometimes there's a no, and it depends on the client fighting for it and helping the person who truly is saying no understand why it's a good idea. The why behind it matters, and not just coming up and throwing spaghetti against a wall to hope that something sticks, because that's when a no remains a no. So if agencies can articulate why this and why this now, what will it do differently for the brand? That it just gives it an opportunity for longer life.
Yeah, that's really great and really useful. And I think tied to that, if you're thinking about the agencies you may hire or are likely to hire in the next 12, 24 months, whatever it is, what are they doing differently? How are they reaching you? How are they keeping your attention? How are they offering value and like rising above the heap of what I'm guessing is thousands of marketers pitching you all day?
So another agency that I am really hot on is the MRN agency. And part of the reason is the diversity aspect. It is a woman-owned a Latina woman-owned agency. And the Hispanic market matters to us. Diversity and inclusion, of course, matters to us. We are as diverse as every human in the United States. We sell insurance, doesn't matter who, where, when, how, what. Insurance is for everyone in the country. And so those voices, that perspective is really, really compelling and important. And MRN is grounded in data and insight, so there's not random acts of marketing, which is super important to me. The why, that's where that is sort of born. And that perspective of a market, the perspective of, soccer is another one. We've been in soccer for a long time, but thinking about soccer and elevating, instead of us being the quiet sports and people mostly know us NBA and NFL, and a little bit of baseball, right? We're across the spectrum in sports, and MRN helping us think about, based on their other clients like AT&T, for example. And so I say all that to say, who are we looking for differently is diverse agencies. Sometimes boutique agencies are better for a sports niche or a gaming or a culture or some aspect that where a brand is trying to sort of elevate differently than it had before. Also, the perspective of keeping the business of what we do running with our current set of agencies and not upsetting the apple cart there of what's working well. So those are just, that might have been all over the place, but literally that's all the things in my mind as I think about the stable of agency partners that we currently have and that we're looking to bring on.
That makes sense. And I guess with that, what are the areas that you found harder to source, right, in terms of agency talent or whether or maybe even hiring that role in-house? Like what are the areas that's like, oh crap, we need to fill this need, if anything comes to mind?
Yeah, we're in a tough industry. It's competitive. There's not, how many ways can you talk about insurance that's
Yeah.
interesting and compelling that all of our competitors aren't doing too. And so sometimes we have to have the right expectations. Like I said, sometimes when an agency isn't doing well, the problem is the client sometimes. And so sometimes we're wanting, to catch lightning in a bottle over and over and over again. And so Jake from State Farm, that asset is working so well for us. And we have a stable of assets. We already talked about the line, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. The jingle, right? The notes associated with that line, the logo, the color red, the khakis, right? So we've got a mix of assets that we would love all of them to be as prominent as they can be, for example. And so sometimes there's, I don't know, realistic or unrealistic expectations that some agency can, like, okay, you did it with Jake, now let's go do it with khakis or whatever.
Yeah.
We didn't say that, but that's the idea. And sometimes we have to just figure out, is it possible what we want to do? And let's go down that road a couple of exits, don't just stop, or is it not possible? And those are the kinds of things that, can an agency help us solve that problem or not?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's things that you already know to work, and there's already a lot that you're working with. And my guess is something like insurance, like a big part of it is reliability and it not changing every 5 seconds, right? It's not
Yeah.
like clothing. So
Right.
I guess to do a little sidebar, assuming you're privy to this and you were around for it, what's the origin story of Jake from State Farm? How did that come about? And why is it
Yeah.
so
So
successful? Yeah.
Yeah, so Jake, there's an original Jake, not the current Jake. Original Jake is Jake, and he is from State Farm. He's a call center employee and currently is. And at the time, this was more than 10 years ago. And of course, I wasn't here, but I know the story. It's actually someone who's my head of brand creative and strategy. She was on the team that went and they were shooting a commercial, and we used to put real agents in commercials back then, and sometimes employees, and they were looking to do a call center representative. And it's a pretty famous commercial. Your creatives probably know it. It's the "What are you wearing?" commercial. And he says, khakis.
Yeah.
And so it's that from more than 10 years ago. And they needed somebody to be the call center person. And it really was Jake from State Farm who was wearing khakis. So we used him, and that spot more than 10 years ago caught fire, and they ran that thing for like 10 years. Not literally, don't, but forever. Um and didn't change it. And he became he had a little bit of a cult following, but more importantly, what the brand understood as, more present day was I'll call it one word, Jake from State Farm had some equity built up into it already. Just because of the one spot that people thought was funny and that they ran over fits and starts for the better part of a decade. And so they realized, well, we should lean into that Jake from State Farm. So there was a very big casting call, as the creatives on the line will know. And Kevin, Jake, just jumped off the screen. He truly is the persona and the person that you see. He's from the Midwest. He has those values, that good neighbor spirit. He's not acting. I mean, we could absolutely have found an actor who looked remotely like the original Jake, who could say the lines and convincingly deliver them. Or we could go with this person who looked nothing like the original Jake, but who embodied who we are as being a good neighbor and could really bring our brand promise to life. And that was really important for us. So he's not, how we use him, he doesn't hawk insurance. He doesn't sell insurance. That character doesn't do that. But that character can show up virtually or in real life in places that a cartoon or a caricature couldn't. And, 1 week apart, last year we were at TwitchCon and 1 week later at BravoCon. And Jake made personal appearances at both. And I thought, oh boy, both of them equally like, "Ugh, is anybody going to care at a gaming show when all the biggest gamers in the world are there, to go say hi to an insurance character?" Heck yes. The line was 45 minutes long to go take a picture with Jake. And then I thought, okay, well then surely at BravoCon, that's a completely different demographic and a completely different audience. Oh, sure enough, 50-year-old women were lining up to go meet Jake from State Farm. And I say that jokingly, but really the asset has scaled. And I believe it's because it's the personification of who we are more than a character who's reciting lines.
Yeah, and I think, and I mean this in a good way, but I also think the genericness of that character is like something people can empathize with, and it reminds them of their friend or of themselves. And Scott Adams controversies aside, that was like the intention of Dilbert, was it just to be a
Right.
weird name, generic character, somebody that I know and see every day and everything
Yeah.
like that. So maybe there's some of that going on as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, and I guess kind of getting towards the end of our time. What are you working on now? Like what's exciting to you and so on. Yeah.
I'm really excited about gaming. So, in that category of generating future demand and sort of putting Jake from State Farm into places authentically where we have a brand have been. Gamerhood 2 starts in June. It's every Thursday on Twitch and YouTube for the month of June. And we have some of the biggest names in gaming and gaming content creators, 8, by the way, who are playing this year in teams of 2. Last year, all 8, they were different players and they were playing solo. So this year, teams of 2. And I'm really excited because it's all things gaming. Players who are watching can play in real time and win trivia, win prizes in real time. Jake is there. Yard games and fun little antics happen, and a couple of insurable moments go on, little mini catastrophes that go on in the gamerhood that the players have to cope with while they're gaming. So we're really excited. It was very successful season 1, which was last June. And I'm really, really excited to roll it out bigger and better than ever on June 1st, Thursday, June 1st. And excited about that. And equally excited about our spot in sports. We really value our role in supporting sports and women's sports. We've been doing that for decades, kind of quietly. And so we're excited about, we're shooting our upcoming sports campaigns. We always do that in the summer. So we're starting to think about that, and you'll begin to see those new campaigns roll out here over the next several months.
Awesome. That's great to know. And I think there's so many valuable tidbits for agencies to take from this. So really appreciate it, Allison, and hope we can do it again.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.